Hello, I'm Mark Schildhouse, and because things on the internet seem to lose their date references pretty quick, today is Wednesday, October 9, 2024. On Saturday, September 28, 2024, we visited the Combat Air Museum at Forbes Field, Topeka, Kansas, and I love airplanes. We had done numerous aviation museums associated with this trip prior to this, and I will tell you to be slightly disappointed with this one and yet be happy with it, so disappointed and happy at the same time. This museum has a lot of aircraft, and they are jammed into 2 hangars and a few parked outside. Some are not in pretty shape at all. Some are in pretty darn good shape. And it's rough to have a aviation museum because airplanes take up a lot of space, and space is expensive. And they also require a lot of maintenance. Even if they're just static displays, they don't come in pristine condition, and they're museum pieces. So what condition do you keep them in? And you're going to see some aircraft in this presentation that are really tough. They're not in good shape, and then you're going to see other aircraft that are in really beautiful shape. So the questions are, would I go back to this museum again and pay admission, because it does charge admission? Parking is free. Admission, there's a reasonable admission fee. The answer is yes. If I were back in the Topeka area, which I actually expect to be in maybe the next 2 years, I'll go back. I wasn't real happy with how all the airplanes were maintained. I understand their situation. You need money to fix airplanes. You need people to fix airplanes, even if they're volunteers. You need money to fix airplanes. They take parts, they take tools, they take materials, paints, oils, whatever else. So would I recommend you visit this one? Yeah. Yep. Yeah, come back and visit this one. And help them out, and you'll enjoy it. I hope you enjoy it. You get to see a fair amount of airplanes and some other stuff along the way. There's some tracked vehicles there. There's some missiles and rockets. There's a difference between a missile and a rocket. A missile is guided, a rocket's ballistic. Fire a rocket, goes wherever the heck it wants to go. Fire a missile and it makes corrections to get where it's supposed to go, or where it thinks it's supposed to go. Anyways, let's get on with the video. Combat Air Museum, Forbes Field, Topeka, Kansas. I would recommend you go back and see it, help them out, and I wish them the best of luck with maintaining and repairing the aircraft. They've got one of my favorites, and that's the S2 C1 series of Grumman aircraft, which I've flown. I've got more than 1,000 hours in it, and to me that is the ultimate pilot's airplane. That is an airplane that you don't hit and slap while you pre-flight, you caress it, and she's just a beautiful airplane, and I love her. And they've got one, and it's in pretty darn good shape. Not great, just pretty darn good. Let's get on with the video. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you in another one.
This is the entrance area to the Combat Air Museum in Kansas, and parking is free, and there's a good amount of it. There's obviously a few displays outside the museum. These are primarily weather worn, unfortunately, but it is a nice museum to visit. It has, I'm going to honestly say, it's got a couple of problems. Number one, it takes a lot of money to run a good aviation museum, and the money gives it space, gives it maintenance, gives it docent support, gives it a lot of things. This museum is short the space and the money and the maintenance, but still I enjoyed it. But if you're looking for pristine examples of the aircraft, this museum is wanting, unfortunately. These first 2 pictures are displays that are on the hall as you walk into the ticket area, and these last 2 are indexes to where things are in the museum. And there's there's a lot in this museum. These airplanes are in this. There's a lot in this museum. When we purchased our tickets, this is a feed paid museum. When we purchased our tickets, we were told that one of the very first things we should do is go out and see the EC-121, and this is, I believe, called a Warning Star. And because as the heat builds up, this thing's going to get rather warm because it's not air conditioned. And so that was the first trip we made, and this is an aircraft with a degree of history, the type of aircraft, and one of those little bits of history is one of them was shot down by North Korea and killed a number of people. If you want to read the events that of the loss, you can stop. The last couple of panels of this display are discuss that shoot down. I did like the fact that the helicopters in the museum are correctly labeled. The CH-54 is the Tarhe. Tarhe. It's a leader of an Indian tribe, and in civilian world it's referred to as a sky crane, and you'll find it referred to as a sky crane as well. This is a massive aircraft, and parked underneath it is a AT-17, I think it is, a Bamboo bomber, a Cessna T-50, and it just dwarfs that aircraft, that fuselage. The Sikorsky CH-53 has been running around in numerous configurations since it was introduced. It started out as a twin-engine aircraft. Now it's 3 engines. It is a heavy lifter for the Marine Corps, and there's on display, I think it's the twin-engine version. They allow you to walk up it. I tried to get cockpit pictures of it. That was the best I could do. The cockpit is protected by plexiglass, which is reflective. The Combat Air Museum has the UH-1 Iroquois properly labeled, and one of them is identified as a composite. The reason it's a composite is it's actually a structure, it's an aircraft fuselage built from several other Iroquois Huey aircraft, so it's not one aircraft, it's presentation of others. Sometimes museums do what you have to do. This engine sitting here in this stand is a Lycoming T-53, the engine that powered the single-engine Huey series. This is a scale, 7/8 scale replica of a 1916 Siemens Schuckert D1. It looks really nice. The workmanship on it was very good. We'd seen this one in another museum. It's a Republic F-84 Thunderstreak, and it's a modification from the original F-84, which had straight wings. This got swept wings, and as I said in the other video, it's, in my opinion, an ugly airplane. It needs some help. One of the other things, and I apologize for this, trying to get photos, I'm using a digital camera, a Canon digital camera, which does usually pretty darn well. And throughout this visit, I was having problems trying to get it to focus. Whether it's the glare, the contrast in colors, or the lack of light, or whatever, it's usually a pretty darn good camera, and it was giving me problems here. This panel talks about how the paint schemes of airplanes have changed over the years, and depending on what theater you're operating in, what the dangers are, whatever, you change your paint scheme accordingly. So if you're flying over the desert, you do not paint your airplanes green. You paint them brown, tan, whatever. And if you're flying over jungle, you don't. You try not to leave them shiny bare metal, polished metal. The Russian/Soviets, the MiG people, licensed their aircraft to be built in numerous countries, and this MiG-15 was built in Poland. It's designated a LIM-2, still identified as a MiG-15. If you were to fight it in combat, it would fight the same. You would have to fight it the same way as if you were fighting a MiG-15 that was built in the Soviet Union. This MiG-17, the Fresco C, was actually another Polish built. It's a LIM-6R, and there were, when people ask how do you get MiGs, because quote unquote they're a Soviet aircraft, once these countries came away from the Iron Curtain, they were selling these things literally dirt cheap. The other thing is defectors gave them to us. So we got a number of aircraft because we had defectors bringing them to us. This is the MiG-21 fish bed, and as a military pilot, you have to learn how to identify these aircraft. And if you look behind the cockpit, there's this like tunnel thing, and that was where the fish laid down, so it was a fish bed. The other thing is this is a very variable geometry inlet, so as you get the aircraft's transonic and supersonic, that green thing in the front actually goes in and out to maintain a subsonic airflow through the engine. Supersonic air cannot enter a jet engine and work. In these first two panels, you really need to pause the video and read what we had done for the Chinese. They needed a radar system for the F-8 that they were building, their F-8, not our F-8, and we contracted to do it with them. So that's really helpful. Let's see, give your enemy the best radar system that you've got. Of course, it's great for capitalism, but it's not really good for battle survival. I never flew the F-4. I was on several aircraft carriers that flew F-4s, numerous Marine Corps bases that flew F-4s, working with their squadrons and whatever else. And every shoulder patch I ever saw was McDonnell F-4 Phantom II. I never saw McDonnell Douglas. I still consider it to be a McDonnell aircraft. It was designed by McDonnell before the merger, and they did produce the F-4 after McDonnell Douglas and merged. So, but up in St. Louis, where these were built at Lambert Field, the top of the hangar simply said McDonnell. So I consider this, the F-4, to be the McDonnell F-4 Phantom II. And it's the Phantom II because McDonnell had a Phantom earlier in its history. Another McDonnell aircraft, the F-101 Voodoo. I try to group aircraft by their manufacturers. If I can do it conveniently, I try to put them in series by date or by numbering system, some sort of logic. And the McDonnell Douglas, the McDonnell F-101 Voodoo, actually an impressive looking aircraft. If you follow aviation history and you follow the Douglas A-4 Skyhawk, you know that it's probably one of the aircraft that has been produced in more different variants than any other aircraft in the sky. Single seat, twin seat, trainer versions, attack versions, super electronic versions, all sorts of things. And the A-4 is also what John McCain got shot down in when he was, as he was taken prisoner of war over North Vietnam. The museum does not have a C-9 Nightingale, which is a civilian, military version of the DC-9 by Douglas Aircraft. It has a cockpit trainer, and as you look at this, you realize that the flight engineer on this is looking at one massive set of electrical controls. Going through my airframe and power plant school, Aviation Technology, Southern Illinois University, I worked on C-47s and the civilian DC-3s. They were absolutely super simple aircraft to work on, which is what made them so dependable for the U.S. military, in particular during World War II, in support of the paratroopers. And this was a really good example of C-47 Skytrain. The Douglas F-3D Sky Knight is a side-by-side twin-engine jet aircraft, and every one I've ever seen, and I've only seen about 5 of them, have all been painted black. The first one I ever saw was sitting on the seawall in Pensacola, Florida, when I was getting my commissioned aviation officer candidate school. It was rotting away, sitting out there in the salt environment, and nobody cared for it. This one here looked pretty good. This is a big, kind of ugly airplane that looks like if you were to fly it into hell, it would protect you. There were a number of jet engines, on display, a lot of radials, a lot of turbojets, and you're going to see one of the J-57s later on, which was a really cool presentation. The F-3D Sky Knight got 2 of these massive engines, these J-34s. I hope this aircraft is being restored. I just happen to love this aircraft. This is actually an A-217, and I know it as the T-50, the Cessna Bamboo Bomber. There's not much of it here. It's minus its undercarriage, it's minus its wings, it's minus all that's here is the basic fuselage. This is a twin-engine aircraft, and on one of my when I was learning how to fly in the age 16, 17 years old, I have video, Super 8 video of Super 8 film of one of these landing at Chicago Midway, and I have some still photos of one of these parked at Howell Airfield just outside of Chicago. Back to those days at AvTech in Southern Illinois University, we had 2 T-33 Shooting Stars from Lockheed that had been Air Force and National Guard aircraft that we used for training. We worked on their engines, we ran them up, started the engine, shut them down, whatever else. They're powered by J-33 engines, which are centrifugal compressor engines, which had minor difficulties. Good aircraft though. This aircraft was overbuilt because we didn't fully understand the stresses that a jet aircraft would have to take, and its twin is the F-80, which is single-seat fighter. This is the 2-seat trainer, also called the T-Bird. Well, this exhibit carries a rather unusual name, and it's the Rowley Curtis JN4D2 Jenny, and it states very clearly that this is a full-scale replica of a true Jenny, a Curtis JN2 Jenny. So, and beautiful workmanship. Whoever put this together did a really nice job. I couldn't tell the difference. I'm not an expert on JNs, on Jennies, but I've seen several of them, and this one just looked really good. It's a tough proposition to duplicate an aircraft that's 50, 60 years before your time, before the time you're doing it. One of the aircraft that was multi-service and therefore multi-named, the Harvard Mark IV. This one came out of Canada, the Royal Canadian Air Force, built by the Canadian Car Factory for them, and then sold into the civilian market at the end of their useful military career. They're also a derivative of the Texan and the Harvard for the United States, and numerous other aircraft. Very popular in the air show business. They were fairly inexpensive to buy, fairly easy to fly, and fairly easy to maintain. Civilian aircraft are frequently drafted into military service, sometimes without modification, sometimes with minor, sometimes with major modifications. And the Beechcraft RU-8D Seminole, which is shown here, was one of those aircraft that was drafted into military service. It's powered by a Lycoming 0480 horizontally opposed engine, and that was also on display here. So this is a Vietnam War veteran. It was used in Vietnam, obviously, and then brought back into the United States as it was no longer needed in Southeast Asia. Another aircraft drafted into military service, the Beechcraft Beech 18 Twin Beech. In the Navy, it was SNB, Small Navy Bomber, and some other affectionate names. In the Army Air Corps, it was the C-45. It was used for a number of things, including trainers, executive transport, trainers for navigators, trainers for radar operators, trainers for a number of different things. And later on became one of those aircraft that were put at duty stations for proficiency flying. This is a fun airplane to work on. It's a fun airplane to fly, and I can say that from experience. The Grumman F9, which is the Panther. Grumman likes to call their fighters cat names, Panthers, Cougars, Tomcats, whatever. And this is a Korean era aircraft, and there were two versions to this, if I have my history right, without looking it up. One was a straight wing version, one was a swept wing version. Straight wing because that was the technology and the aerodynamics that came out of World War II, and then as we digested what the Germans had learned about aerodynamics, what we had learned about aerodynamics, we went into swept wing aircraft. Grumman aircraft fighter, the F-11, so it is a Tiger, and this is another one of the follow-on to the end of the Korean War, as we learned about more about aerodynamics in jet aircraft and how we wanted them to land and take off aircraft carriers. We needed their wings to fold for carrier deck space. We needed the aircraft to be strong enough to survive multiple carrier landings. And the Grumman series, Leroy Grumman did an absolutely fantastic job, and I speak that from having more than 5,000 hours in Grumman products. I've flown a lot of aircraft in my flight years. I soloed in 1968 while back at Chicago Midway, and got my license early in 1969. I had yet to graduate high school, and went active duty with the Navy in 1975 after having flown quite a bit before joining the Navy, and flew quite a bit after I retired from the Navy. And one of my favorite series of aircraft is the Grumman C-1 Trader, or the Grumman S-2 series trackers, and some of the trackers were converted into US-2s and carried passengers instead of sonar equipment. And I flew US-2Bs, and this is a US-2A, but this is, in my opinion, the best multi-engine trainer aircraft ever built, and I've flown quite a few multi-engine aircraft, and this aircraft is a pilot's airplane. If you can fly this airplane well, you can fly any multi-engine reciprocating aircraft. I love this airplane. This is you don't pre-flight this one, you caress it before you fly. The Grumman F-14 Tomcat that they have was at Navy Fighter Weapons School. I think that's what its name is anyways. And right now it's in they tell you the wings are in overswept position. This is not a position that the wings would be in when you flew. This was for deck storage. It's for space storage. If you've been looking in the back of these photos, this museum has got a lot of aircraft and not a whole lot of floor space. And if you read the plaque on this one here, you'll also find out that the engines have been pulled. Iran is still flying the F-14, and we're talking 2024, so we're trying to keep parts out of their hands. When I was stationed in the Philippines, the stock room in the Philippines would carry parts for these, and the parts would disappear. We pretty much knew where they went, but not how to stop it. Well, we knew how to stop it. We weren't going to. Back to those days at A&P school, I worked on Hiller's OH-23s, and it's an interesting aircraft. You actually fly those paddles that you see in the rotor plane, and those paddles with gyroscopic effect actually change the rotor angle as you so desire it. Interesting control process, and this was an aircraft that saw a lot of military service. Very, very dependable military service. The North American F-86 Sabre is what I would consider to be the optimum design appearance blow tube jet. Blow tube jet because the aircraft is basically built to have an inlet, an engine, and an outlet with nothing to interfere with it, and they were referred to as blow tube jets. At the end of the blow tube jet series with the F-100, we would go to what's called the Century Series. F-100s and on are referred to as the Century Series jets. F-84, F-86, those were the blow tube series. The Vivalti BT-13 Valiant, which was also referred to as the Vivalti Vibrator, was one of our basic trainers as we entered World War II. Well, it had a constant speed prop, which made engine management an interesting issue for a beginner. It had fixed gear, so it took some of the complexity away from it. It was also built to various military specs, so you'll see other things like the BT-13, the SNV-1, and things like that, as the different military, the Navy and the Army Air Corps had different desires in their aircraft, so there were modifications made for that specific service. So they had a Messerschmitt 109, which people will frequently tell you is the ME 109, ME for Messerschmitt, BF 109, and whatever it stands for, Bavarian Fighter 109, whatever. And it's actually a clone. It's actually a mock-up. It's not a real aircraft, but it sure does look pretty. There were 3 World War I vintage aircraft hanging up in the overhead. Not sure if they were real aircraft or not. I think they were probably mock-ups or clones or replicas, whatever you want to call it. A Fokker E4 series, which looked really good. And then this air code DH1, and I'm guessing that it's what it is. I'm not quite sure. It wasn't labeled. And I think this is, I have no idea what this last one is. Naval Air Station Olathe, Kansas was closed after operating for a number of years in 1969-1970 time frame in segments, and was turned over to the county to be operated as a county airport through acquisition processes, which took a couple years. A number of squadrons had their home bases here. In the later years, it was all reserves. The museum has a newer model of the Jeep, which was general purpose W if it was made by Ford. If it was made by Willys, it was GPW. If it was made by Ford, it was GPF, I believe, or whatever. Anyways, Jeep is not its official name. It is a quarter-ton four-wheel drive utility vehicle, whatever. But because of the general purpose, GP became Jeep. This is a nice one, and evidently they still use it. If I'm correct, this is an M29 Weasel, World War II and follow-on for several years vintage vehicle, designed to be most terrain vehicle. Used to have one of these as a little plastic toy when I had a whole bunch of plastic army stuff. Sliding a little bit away from Combat Air Museum, but what does it take to support combat aircraft? So that's where we get the Jeep. This is a 1941 Dodge WC-9 ambulance brought into military service and served through World War II. This is correctly a DUKW. It is pronounced duck. It is a GMC Model 270, if I'm not mistaken, doing my research on this. Basically, it's an amphibious deuce and a half. It's a 2.5 ton truck, the 6-wheel truck, modified to float. And when it's in its float mode, you engage another portion of the transmission, and that powers the propeller, so that you could drive this thing around on the water, so to speak. Okay, built by Tubular Aircraft Products Company, Los Angeles, California. It's a 3-wheel scooter. Quite honestly, it looks like what my mailman used to carry used to have to drive around the neighborhood long time ago. The RIM 66 or RIM 156 standard missile is the one on the right. Okay, it's a surface-to-air type missile. Doesn't look like it was a air-to-air missile, but it's credited to the Ticonderoga and the Arleigh Burke class Navy carriers and showed up in the Combat Air Museum. There were a couple of trainers on display. This Curtis Wright flight trainer, and sitting next to it was this Link trainer from Days of Old and Bold. Okay, I'm laughing. Gotta have a couple of bombs. If you're a Combat Air Museum, you gotta have a couple of bombs. If you don't have a couple of bombs, you aren't a Combat Air Museum. I love round engines with pistons, and they had several of them on display, including these cutaways. As you're looking through these, we start out with the R2800 Wasp engine, which was a absolutely super engine, or a double Wasp, absolutely super engine, and saw a lot of service. These are rather complex, very interesting designs. Going through numerous things, I've worked on a number of jet engines. I had never seen a display like this. This J57 is taken apart. I'm just going to let you cruise through it, and it gives you an idea of how these engines are put together and how they work. Venturi actions and the pressure differentials by venturis of flowing gases is critical to the efficiency and to the design working of a jet engine. And they kind of bring that into play as they're showing you these pictures. It's the stationary and the rotating vanes. Stationary vanes keep the air flowing through the engine in pretty much in a straight line. The rotating blades are the blades that either compress the air to go into the venturi throat, or to take the energy out of the expanding gases to run the compressor. And a couple of drone engines, and showing you how they made these target drones. McCullough, the chainsaw people, made a couple of these engines, and then another outfit called Ryder. Never heard of them until I read this display. But this is how you improve your pilot's abilities before they enter combat, because if you lose your pilot in the first one or two engagements, you're going to have to spend a long time to replace them. Both jets are an interesting way to operate a jet. They're very simple. They're basically just tubes with venturi set in them. And usually they don't have any compressors, so they have to be taken up to a particular speed before they start to work. The V1 was a pulse jet aircraft, and when we made the clone of the V1, we stuck with the same concept, so you kind of have some fun with it. So we're going to leave the Combat Air Museum, which is at Forbes Field, right outside of Topeka, Kansas, maybe inside the city limits of Topeka, Kansas. It is a very busy museum. As you saw, there are a lot of aircraft and numerous other items in this museum. There is a small admission fee, very reasonable in my opinion, to get into this museum. The docents were extremely friendly. I have some criticisms of the museum, but they're doing as best they can. The aircraft are not in pristine condition. They're not all clean, whatever. But this is reality, and it takes a lot of money to run a museum. It takes a lot of effort, whatever. And if they're struggling, this is what you're stuck with. And I think these guys are doing a really good job with the aircraft they've got. And I'm going to sign off with their US-2A, and I flew the US-2B. I don't know what the difference is, but I flew what we call the used-to-be US-2B, and it was my favorite twin-engine aircraft. I was a flight instructor in it, and I absolutely loved it, and the things it would do. So highly recommend you cruise by the Combat Air Museum just south of the I-70 Interstate Expressway if you're coming through the Topeka, Kansas area. Well worth the stop. Check it out, have fun, bring a camera, bring kids if they love mechanical stuff, and walk around this museum. As I showed you, though, I didn't get good pictures out of it. The aircraft are on top of each other. The signage is pretty darn good. In most cases, there are a few things that aren't identified, but well worth the stop. I enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you in another one.